Jacob is getting to the end of his corporeal existence. He's an old man. He's starting to fail in health. And he has adopted two of Joseph's sons and has blessed them. Genesis 49:1. And Jacob called for his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together around me, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the latter or last days." 49:2. Gather yourselves together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and hearken to Israel your father. So Jacob, he's calling his sons together, and he has something important to say, something very important. And we have this duality of the sons of Jacob and hearken to Israel your father. So he's using both of his names to kind of get their attention, to let them know that this is something serious. Jacob, of course, being his earthly name, and Israel being the name that was bestowed to him by God. So he's being very specific on who he's talking to and has a specific purpose. And of course, there's a specific time as well, in the latter or the last days. Genesis 49:3. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the beginning, the first fruits of my manly strength and vigor. Your birthright gave you the preeminence in dignity and the preeminence in power. Genesis 49:4. But unstable and boiling over like water, you shall not excel and have the preeminence of the firstborn, because you went to your father's bed, you defiled it. He went to my couch. What we have here is almost like a report card. And Jacob is going to go down the list of his sons and explain what they've done well and what they've done poorly. In the case of Reuben, he is very mighty. He is the mighty firstborn and has a lot of power and strength. But he did lie with his father's concubine, as we recall. I think that was Genesis 35. So, I mean, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to sleep with or lie with, known in the biblical sense, your father's concubines. That's just kind of messed up. So he's kind of, nothing really happened at the time there when this occurred. But Jacob knew what was going on, and here we go. He's revealing that he knew that, and he's kind of holding it against him, for it was not a good thing for him to have done. Genesis 49:5. Simeon and Levi are brothers, equally headstrong, deceitful, vindictive, and cruel. Their swords are weapons of violence. It was in Genesis 34, a couple of chapters ago, I guess that's like over 10 now, where the daughter Dinah was taken advantage of, and it was taken by that guy in that town or whatever, and he wanted to marry her, and he had relations with her that was unlawful. And they got the whole group to get circumcised, and then when they were in the pain of the circumcision, Simeon and Levi ran in there and kind of slaughtered all the men of the town. So, yeah, I think that's a fair point. Genesis 49:6. O my soul, come not into their secret council, unto their assembly. Let not my honor be united, for I knew nothing of their plot. Because in their anger they slew men, an honored man, Shechem, and the Shechemites, and in their self-will they disabled oxen. So in that event, in that scenario, where he was negotiating with the people of Shechem, this was the guy that defiled Dinah or whatever it was, and he was trying to negotiate them. It's like, oh, we can kind of be together, but you got to be circumcised like us. So this was what he was negotiating for. He was making peace. But his sons, when they saw the weakness of the circumcision, the couple days after, when they were really sore, they couldn't probably do anything because of you know, the intense pain of the circumcision. And they ran in there and slayed them. This was not what he intended, and he kind of felt almost like a little bit of a betrayal by this, by their actions there, for this was not the intended response. And it kind of made them an enemy of people in the area, and people feared them, for they just went in there and slaughtered this whole town or village. So that's pretty crazy. The last part of this line here is kind of interesting. So an ox is a castrated cow. Make of that what you will. Genesis 49:7. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Anger, wrath, cruelty, not very nice things, not very friendly things. When these two guys got together, these two brothers got together, that their anger combined, and it became a very large force, and it led to the extermination of that group of people. So maybe the idea is going to be that in their descendants, we kind of scatter them in the area, and that way it doesn't escalate to that point again, and that, you know, you can't really keep all these guys together, because you get two fiery people together, you just have more fire. So that's not a really good thing, and I think this really displeased God with their actions there in the slaughtering of that group of people, especially when they made a consecration effort to try to befriend them and to work together with them to undo the damage that was done. Genesis 49:8. Judah, you are the one whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down to you. Well, this is very interesting here. So we got this there's two parts here, right? Your brothers shall praise, and then we have your father's sons shall bow down to you. And I think this is in relation to the genealogy. So Judah was the fourth son of Leah. So his true brothers, his full brothers, would be Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Ishkar, and Zebulun. And then all the others, they're not full brothers. They're either step brothers or adopted brothers, right? Because there's Manasseh and Ephraim, which were the sons of Joseph that were adopted in, right? So all the other ones, they would be, the sons of the father. And the other thing that we have going on in the future, or later on, there's the two kingdoms. Eventually there's like the kingdom split. So there's like the kingdom of Israel, and then there's the kingdom of Judah, and they kind of have their little spats and stuff that we'll see throughout history. So I think this is almost like a prophecy of that aspect of the future descendants after they get out of Egypt. So several books from now. So that's just kind of interesting, and I find that very fascinating. Of course, the last part of that sentence was your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. So when you have your enemy by the neck, that usually means you got him, right? You just need to do a little bit of a squeeze, and that's the end of that. So Genesis 49:9. Judah, a lion's cub with the prey. My son, you have gone high up the mountain. He stooped down, he crouched like a lion, and like a lioness who dares provoke and rouse him. So I think this is kind of a reference to the power of Judah. The Judah is going to be like the lion, that, you don't want to mess with a lion because you just, it doesn't end very well, and we'll see that in the future, where the lion pounces and crushes the neck of its enemy. Genesis 49:10. The scepter or leadership shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Sheol, the Messiah, the peaceful one, comes, to whom it belongs, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. I guess the easiest way to explain this one would be to have a spoiler. So, King David, who, I mean, even if you're not a well seasoned reader of the Bible or a studier of the Word of God, you've probably heard King David before. King David and the kingly line, the royal line goes through Judah, and it eventually leads up to the Messiah, which is Jesus. So that part of this prophecy here gets fulfilled. And I'm sorry for the spoilers. I should have had a spoiler alert, but it is good news, and it is good that this has happened. But that's just kind of what happens throughout history. This is kind of a setup or whatever, that we got kind of this royal line through Judah. Genesis 49:11, binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garment in wine, his clothes in the blood of grapes. Well, this is certainly a very interesting prophecy, and we'll just go through line by line, word by word, phoneme by phoneme, and we'll get through this somehow. Because this is certainly an interesting sentence. Binding his foal to the vine. So a foal is like a young version of an animal, and I think in this instance, because it mentions the word donkey later, that it's referring to a young donkey. And a donkey's colt, which it refers to immediately afterwards, is a young male donkey. So we got this idea of binding this donkey to the vine, and then it's like binding this male donkey to the vine. I think it's a double repeater, in the sense that these are two lines referring to the same thing. That we have this donkey. It's like, well, the donkey was tied to the vine. No, it was tied to the choice vine, and the choice vine is obviously, well, not necessarily obviously, I hate using that word, but a vine that produces fruit, right? So this would have been a vine that would make grapes or whatever. And we got to remember here that these boys, they're starving. They're in Egypt during an intense famine. They were on the run from the famine in the land of Canaan. They came down to Egypt because Egypt had food, but the memory of the famine was not far from them, for they narrowly escaped from it. So, right, the idea of this donkey, which is just, a livestock animal or whatever, that they're tying it to a vine, and it's just going to sit there and eat grapes all day and all night, right? Like, it's just going to mow down on all of that. So it's kind of an interesting sentence in that way, and the idea of this nice donkey there, this young male donkey tied to the vine, just eating the grapes, is probably kind of shocking. It's like, is this going to be in an era where there's just so much wealth that, they don't really think about the loss of the grapes? And yeah, there's probably going to be elements to that, but I think there's more to it than that. So then we have the second part, the second aspect, with he washes his garments in wine, his clothes in the blood of grapes. And I think this is the same kind of double repeater. The blood of grapes means grape juice, and probably fermented grape juice would be, well, I mean, there was no, what do you call that, food preservation back then. They couldn't really stop the juice from turning into wine, right? The juice really wants to be wine. You just leave it out there for a while, and that's just what it's going to become. So here we got a repeat of this idea of washing the clothes and the wine. So that's interesting. So a couple of things that really kind of stick out to me would be that, Jesus, when he came into the city, he came in on that white donkey, and maybe this is a reference to that donkey, for Jesus is of the line of Judah. And then the second aspect was, we got this within like the New Testament, with like the breaking of bread and the blood of Christ. We have like the drinking wine with the breaking of bread as kind of the symbology of the sacrifice and the blood of Christ. And it's like the idea of washing the sins away with the blood of Christ. And it's like, well, here's kind of the reverse of that. He's washing his clothes in wine, so maybe that's some sort of purification system, some sort of reference to that in the way that Christ is going to come and provide salvation. So there's certainly, an interesting aspect if you look at it that way. But is this prophecy about Jesus and his first coming, or is this a reference to more later on in the end times when the destruction comes? And there's certainly aspects to it that lead to that. The recommended verses, of course, Isaiah 63, Zechariah 9, and Revelation 19. So further study is definitely needed to really truly understand what this prophecy is about. And even then, it could be a dual prophecy. It could be prophesying the coming of Christ the first time and the second. I mean, it's double repeated, and it's like, well, is it repeating itself for extra emphasis, or is this meaning two separate events, or two? I don't know. It's interesting, and I mean, you could really dive into that and try to figure out exactly what's going on, but I don't know. It's interesting. Genesis 49 and 12. His eyes are darker and more sparkling than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Of course, our other aspect, our secondary aspect, beyond looking at this as like a prophecy for when Christ is coming and the Messiah and the Lion of the tribe of Judah, would be the literal descendants in the coming era when they return back to the promised land of Canaan. With this description of washing the clothes in wine and hitching the donkey on the vine that produces grapes, it really sounds like they would be very wealthy, and some of it almost sounds like a stylistic thing. Maybe they're really good looking people, like the best looking of the bunch type of thing, and that they'll be very stylized, fashionable, with these grapes. Maybe the washing the clothes with grapes or whatever, that it would impart some of the scent and have floral effects that would be desirable. We have this sparkling eyes or whatever, the darker and sparkling eyes or whatever, and it sounds like it might be like a really good looking person type of thing. Very white teeth. White is usually a symbol of purity, so maybe pure white teeth and some sort of purity aspect, along with a wealthy aspect, and just people that are very successful and are able to accomplish much. And being different than the other groups that we saw described previously, that it's not the strength that defines them or the violence that defines them, but it is like their wealth and just success that is going to define this group of Judah. Genesis 49:13. Zebulun shall live towards the seashore, and he shall be a haven and a landing place for ships, and his border shall be towards Sidon. So here we go. We got Zebulun, and it sounds like a more maritime thing, so they're probably going to settle in an area closer to the seashore. How wonderful. Genesis 49:14. Issachar is a strong-boned donkey crouching down between the sheepfolds. 49:15. And he saw the rest was good, and that the land was pleasant, and he bowed his shoulder to bear his burdens, and became a servant to tribute, subject to forced labor. That doesn't sound as pleasant as some of these others, but there is something to be said about those that are strong-boned and hard workers, even if it is to the point of being a servant to tribute, to forced labor. That part doesn't sound so good, but the being the hard worker, that sounds like a good attribute and one that is desirable in a person or a family. Genesis 49:16. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. 49:17. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a horned snake in the path, that bites at the horse's heel, so that his rider falls backwards. So we have Dan. He almost sounds like he's going to be the lawyer of the bunch, the one that's going to bring down the judgment. But then we have this secondary aspect. Shall be as a serpent. So that sounds kind of scary. And then we have this metaphor with the horse. So we have this snake that's kind of in the path, and the horse, he kind of sees the snake and knocks the rider off, right? That Dan is going to be the one that's kind of laying and waiting and ready to kind of snap out and cause some mischief. Genesis 49 and 18. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. This section on Dan is quite interesting, the snake and everything. It feels like it's got kind of a duality of meanings as well. So we got the idea of the snake being the attacker, to be the striking force. You know, it's not that big. You know, a snake, it's not a giant lump of body mass, not like a lion or a tiger or a bear, but it is much more nimble than that. So we got the tribe of Dan. Maybe they're not the biggest or the most powerful tribe, but they can strike with a lot of force. And Samson is of the tribe of Dan, and we'll run into Samson a little bit later. And it's an interesting story and a person, and it'll be interesting when we get there. But then there's this other aspect of the snake where it's like you get a snake in your midst. So it's like you're out camping or whatever, and the snake's in like someone's tent or whatever, and that just ruins your day. And the tribe of Dan, sometimes they get into idolatry or whatever, and they cause a lot of harm and damage from within. And I think it's a really good example if that's why it's being used in this way, because of the plurality of the snake and the interpretation of the snake. I don't know, it seems like a good fit. Unfortunately, right? But, you know, sometimes that's what happens. You get attacked from within. You have your firing squad set up in a circle. Stuff is just not necessarily the way it needs to be, and you're bringing it down from within to the gossip, right? Not necessarily a good thing. And it's very destructive. And Dan, as we'll see down the road, they can be very destructive to within. Genesis 49:19. Gad, a raiding troop, shall raid him, but he shall raid at their heels and assault them victoriously. That almost sounds like the idea of attacking someone when they're down, where it's like they don't raid, they don't attack direct and openly. They wait for a weakness, and then when the weakness is present, then they go in for the attack, and that way they're able to be victorious. Whether or not that's a good or bad thing remains to be seen. Genesis 49 and 20. Asher's food supply shall be rich and fat, and he shall yield and deliver royal delights. Well, there we go. Asher that sounds pretty good. Being able to provide food and good, tasty food, and being a supplier of that sounds like a good prophecy to have on the descendants of Asher. Genesis 49:21. Naphtali is a hind, let loose, which yields lovely fawns. So he sounds like he's the Birdman. In the New King James, it reads as, Naphtali is a deer, let it loose. He uses beautiful words. That's why it's a good idea to maybe have a couple other versions handy, because sometimes it's clearer in others, and this does not sound like the Birdman. But then again, that could be my limited comprehension to the word hind, which I guess refers to deer. It's kind of a technical term, I guess. Some of the other translations, they use the word doe, and I know doe because I watch Sound of Music, and a doe is a deer, a female deer. Anyway, so this sounds like an idea of a free spirit, somebody that is not bound by the conventional rules. And we add that second part there, he uses beautiful words. So maybe it's kind of a comedian or a poet or some sort of presenter of information. When we think about the Jewish people and the descendants of Israel, there's certain stereotypes that show up. One of them, of course, is the comedian. The other one is the lawyer. And then you got like the banker and the shrewd businessman. So I don't know if some of those are buried in here and these people are descendants of those particular tribes, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Genesis 49:22. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well, a spring or a fountain, whose branches run over the wall. 49:23. Skilled archers have bitterly attacked and sorely worried him. They have shot at him and persecuted him. 49:24. But his bow remained strong and steady and resisted in strength that does not fail him. For the arms of his hands were made strong and active by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob, by the name of the shepherd, the rock of Israel. So the bough, B-O-U-G-H, means kind of like the root of a tree. Other translations use the word vine. And a well-watered vine, a well-watered tree grows really well and it can be very strong. So that idea is being applied to Joseph, that when Joseph is properly supplied, he will be very successful and be very fruitful. But the inverse might be a possibility as well, that, you know, when he's not really looked after, maybe he doesn't do so good. And we've looked at his life in the last couple of chapters, in his time in Egypt. And two of his sons have already been adopted into the main family by Jacob, so that's kind of significant. And given the opportunity, he was able to provide all the food that was necessary for the family by bringing them all down to Egypt and looking after them. So it is understandable to assume that this will kind of continue it into like a trend, that even through adversity, even through hard times, Joseph will be able to come through. The second part of this, I think, is referential to his own life and journey. He was persecuted by his brothers, sold into slavery, sold into Egypt, accused of an assault type of situation, was thrown into the dungeon, was run in the dungeon. It was, no matter what happened, he was able to be the overcomer. He was able to deal with difficult situations. So that his descendants, it would make sense that they would have elements of that in them as well. That they are strong, for God is looking after them. The rock of Israel. Genesis 49:25. By the God of your father, who will help you, and by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of the heavens above, blessings lying in the deep beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. 49:26. The blessings of your father on you are greater than the blessings of my forefathers, Abraham and Isaac, on me, and are as lasting as the bounties of the eternal hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who was the consecrated one, and the one separated from his brethren, and the one who is prince among them. Well, it really looks like Joseph is getting some of the coolest blessings there is. And these blessings are greater than that on his forefathers. And I think some of that comes down to the actions of Joseph. You know, he really trusted in God and believed in God. And God delivered him. And the circumstances he went through were pretty intense. I mean, yeah, Abraham had his hard times. Isaac had some hard times. Jacob had some hard times. But they weren't sold into slavery by their brothers and lived in a jail for years and took over another country from the inside. No, that was Joseph. Joseph was just having a good old time. Of course, going through the hard times is one thing, but he was able to help his brothers and help his family. So that's probably the good thing as well. He could have said, well, screw you guys. we're just going to lock you up and make slaves out of you. Although it almost looked like that's what was going to happen. Spies in the land. They're watching everything. So, it's pretty good. Genesis 49:27. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at night dividing the spoil. Oh man, you just got to think about Benjamin. I mean, they're all gathered around their father, and he's not doing so well. This is kind of like a deathbed confession. You're putting the blessings on these kids. And it's like Benjamin, drew the straw that he was after Joseph. And it's like, it doesn't matter what happens after Joseph. Joseph is just, the prince there, can do no wrong, just looks amazing. And then we got Benjamin, the ravenous wolf. It's like you go from the highest high to the lowest low, that he is just an animal that just looks to satiate its desires. Not a good look. Genesis 49:28. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each according to the blessings suited to him. Well, that is quite the collection of blessings that have been bestowed, because he's got 12 kids. It takes quite a while to go through them. And I think some of them are probably not as happy as others with the blessings they receive. Some of them almost sound like curses that they just, I don't know. It is what it is. Ephraim and Manasseh weren't really covered in this, but then again, they were covered in the previous chapter. Maybe this was all just one big old event here that went one into the other right directly. Because the chapters and stuff, they're man-made. They're not originally found in the scriptures. Genesis 49:29. He charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my departed people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field at Ephron the Hittite. 49:30. In the cave in the field of Machpelah, east of Menor, in the land of Canaan, that Abraham bought, along with the field of Ephron the Hittite, to possess as a cemetery. 49:31. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. 49:32. The purchase of the field and the cave that was from the sons of Heth. 49:33. When Jacob had finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up onto the bed and breathed his last breath and was gathered to his departed people. His last act after the blessing of his 12 sons was instruction on his burial place, that he did not want to be buried in Egypt. We saw this a couple of chapters ago. He made his son promise to bury him in the place of Abraham, where Abraham was buried. So he's repeating it again, because this is important. We've seen this multiple times now, that he does not want to be buried in Egypt. He wants to be buried in the promised land, in the land of Canaan, and they have like the family cemetery or whatever, and he wants to be buried there. So that's the end of the life of Jacob, the life of Israel. And everything has been trusted now to his sons. His last will and testament has just been revealed. And that is the end of another chapter.